My name is Dan Beverly, and I started an organization called New Democracy Partners. I've got a long career in working in public policy and in local government and also public engagement. I started this organization after leaving the National Freedom of Information Coalition that I was directing for about 4 years, which is organizations of local government transparency groups around the country, very heavily on the journalism, and working for increasing transparency in public institutions. Having served in public institutions for many years, I had the great opportunity to be able to see both sides of this thing going on. But really the reason that I started the New Democracy Partners was the challenges that I have seen and we've all seen in the growing conflict and polarization in our society, the challenges of hyper-partisanship within our governing bodies and our political institutions there as well. And then also the disinformation and information in the news media, our traditional news source, our news infrastructure, if you will. So I thought about these three pillars, how they represent democracy with society, the news media, and government, and the challenges and interactions among those three to help rebuild and sustain trust and confidence in our institutions. And even though they all kind of work with each other, there's also a lot of dysfunctions going on within those three pillars, as you will. So I thought about taking an opportunity to look at those and work in some areas to help develop reforms, working with other organizations. And so to segue that into the government side of this, one of the things that I really look at here from the government side is the need for rebuilding and sustaining trust within the public institutions of government themselves. It's one of those things where public engagement, which we've been doing for forever, is a great avenue to help rebuild these trust factors and confidence in our public institutions. So it's kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, for governing bodies to be able to utilize that tool that they have available to them to be able to use that to rebuild the confidence and trust in their communities. But again, if we look at what we've been doing over the last few years in terms of the challenges that we've had, it's been really with the pandemic, it's really kind of thrown everything into awry here, if you will. I look back, I consider myself part of the Gov 2.0 generation who knew how this stuff was going on before the pandemic and before technology all came into vogue here. And this area of public engagement in an online experience, we learned during the pandemic about how challenging it was for local governments in particular and governing bodies in general to be able to switch over into that environment there. It's like that area of public engagement, online public engagement, is an area that has really needed to be addressed. And now, with the pandemic subsiding somewhat, we're seeing a lot of local governments continuing to use that online process to engage their customers, but we're still very early on in this. And so what I looked at doing here was, the idea of taking what we've been doing for so long in terms of this public engagement, how it's done today, the traditional ideas, using it for projects and for council meetings, if you will, to connect with the public and to engage them and get their ideas and feedback. But what would that look like if we took that and spread that more and took the opportunities that we had and at the same time managing the risk? How could we decentralize public engagement, across the entire public institution where we're touching into all different areas and all different roles that government plays? And of course, that does come with some risk as well as the opportunities there. So what do I mean by decentralizing public engagement? And it basically means broadly expanding the scope of bringing residents in to participate in the process, but at the same time, developing a structure to organize and expand public engagement across the enterprise. So the two main factors here that we're talking about are technology and the institutional culture within our public institutions. Those are the two things that need to be addressed and transformed here. And so what are the benefits of decentralizing? Well, the first thing it does, it opens more doors to government and to governing agencies for more conversations around issues and policies. It can expand accommodations, beyond the physical limitations of town halls, of chambers of councils and that type of thing, to open it and make it more available and accessible to residents as well. And it also taps into more residents and the more diverse thinking around ideas and feedback there as well. And, in the long run, it makes for more informative decision making. But above all, and more importantly there, it can also create a structure, a greater structure. Even though we decentralize, we can create a greater structure and organization around these deliberations by centralizing government to citizen and citizen government and engagement there. So yes, so we decentralize public engagement by centralizing how we practice that. And Shane, are you going to do these slides, or do you want me to go through these?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and share your screen?
Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay, are we good on that one?
To me.
Are we okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
Great. All right. So I've come up with about 8 propositions that I'd like to go through today here, and hopefully generate some ideas or maybe some controversy depending on your take on these. But we've got the wisdom of crowds here, so I really would welcome any kind of feedback on these. But I want to go through 8 propositions that I think are really critical in moving forward with decentralizing, or how we go about doing something like that, with the overall idea of technology and culture and where that plays a role in this area here as well. So let me go through 8 propositions that we're looking at here. And the first one is, public engagement can be used to build trust in public institutions and as a strategy to improve government's image or brand. Now, public engagement can be considered as a direct pipeline to building trust. If we think about private brands out in the world today, they live and die on the trust and confidence that the consumers have in their products or services there. There's Dr. Danielle Blumenthal. She's a former director of digital engagement at the National Archives, and she writes about how governments develop strong brands. And what she said was, the distinction between government branding and branding in the private sector is that government branding always comes down to trust. You have to put money in the trust bank first, establishing a positive and distinct reputation for trustworthiness and a particular set of values. And one of the most impactful measures to build trust is through increased transparency and access. And from our days at NFOIC and understanding that role there. And so resident participation in government deliberations and the decision making has that greatest return on investment for building trust. So that's the first proposition. The second proposition is that technology and cultural transformations toward, let me back up here. Technology and cultural transformations toward public engagement practices create risk and benefits from increased participation. And that goes without saying, right? So knowing this, we have to have strategies in place to minimize one while taking advantage of the other. And, in today's digital age, government doesn't just operate in a fishbowl anymore. It operates in an aquarium. It's more traffic, more eyes, more interest, and more options. 10 years ago, the Knight Foundation and Pew Research did a study on how people get information on their communities. And one of them was how people get information about their government. And what they found was the overwhelming majority of the people received information about their government through the local news media. And of course, if we fast forward today, that whole ecosystem has changed about social media, social networking, the loss in local news ownership, and that it's changed. And today, the technology and social media has changed that so much that government doesn't have to really rely on some of those traditional means to get the word out to their communities. They don't have to, public information officers don't have to necessarily rely on the news media, on journalists to get information to their residents. There are a number of other means to be able to get information out. So new opportunities and new challenges there as well. The third proposition is a technology infrastructure is essential to increase the capacity and diversity of participation and to complement conventional practices. The idea behind public engagement, the way that it's been done for hundreds of years, the conventional way to be done has proven to be a successful way to do that. Of course, there's some challenges there as well, but the structure that's been created in that and the practices are sound. The technology and the diversification of our society has thrown some things into that makes it more challenging to be able to do. So just like we use technology to be able to create efficiencies and in any kind of practice that we do in anything at all, so too can technology play a critical role in public engagement. But at the same time, the challenge here is the type of technology that's being used and the talent that governments possess to be able to make it work and achieve the desired results that they want to achieve there. The fourth one, benefits from the wisdom of crowds. The idea that large groups of people are collectively smarter than individual experts relies on their diversity and independence to avoid adverse outcomes. And this is where we get into the talking of the need for structure and validation, knowing who you're engaging with, knowing who the community members are in these deliberations, especially these online deliberations. We've heard from many people during the summit here this week about creating citizen juries, mini publics, how to select participants, to represent the socioeconomic diversity of communities. They're essential to ensuring this diversity and inclusiveness and that they are represented among that audience there as well. They're randomly selected, but they, along with the experts, make up that body that government is going to engage with to be able to get that information. So, that is really critical to ensure that you have that in an online environment going on there. And number 5, the quality and quantity challenge is achievable through greater participation, participant attribution and validation. Now, I remember hearing Martine talk about early on that this idea between quality versus quantity, that more isn't always better, but that plays across our whole democratic system here. We can talk about voting, informed voters or whatever. When it comes down to these deliberations, the power is in the public comment. And so we know the power of an orderly, structured town hall meeting, the idea of an individual coming up and validating who they are, attributing their comment to an individual and making it part of that deliberative process is really important. And when it's desired, particularly when you want to know that you're talking to your constituents during budgeting times and making budgeting decisions out there, it's really critical for that. And the technology, can be used to do that. And at the same time, there's a lot of technology out there that accelerates the randomness and the anonymity around those comments. And that's a real challenge that has to be made when you're going online to engage the publics there as well. So let me get to proposition number 6 about minimizing exclusivity by rethinking conventional engagement instruments such as boards, commissions, and task forces as many publics and citizen juries or citizen assemblies for use across the administration and within individual departments. These are traditional ad hoc forums that we've had for forever in terms of how to bring citizens into the process. They serve as a sounding board to public officials. They work as a buffer to a certain extent for governing bodies to be able to have that link between government and the general population out there. But at the same time, and from my experience in working these, and maybe yours as well, there is an exclusiveness around a lot of these boards and commissions and task forces. I sat on a citizen advisory board for many years, and whenever we had a member, step aside, the first question was, does anybody know anybody who wants to serve on the board? And so while you do have these boards working there, they're not necessarily representative of the communities. Now, in this case, we're not talking about randomly, selected residents in this case. We're talking about using technology to provide structured forums that can bring members of the public who have special interests, whether it might be around public safety, transportation, healthcare, education, and using those traditional forums, but bringing more and more and more participants in there to be able to view the information that's being shared with these groups, provide a forum for them to be able to comment on these proceedings that are happening there as well. And again, they serve their main purpose, as I mentioned before, whether as a buffer or a conduit between the government and the public, But again, by using the technology and the way that it can be used, you then bring a lot more people into this and keep them centered on focused things. So these are special interest groups, and it's vehicles for those special interest groups to be able to work in that area there as well. It's also a benefit because using the technology like this, not only does it bring more people in, but it also can help identify additional subject matter experts in the community who may want to participate in some of these deliberations on specific topics, but don't want to take the time out to go to a public meeting or whatever other general type of engagement might be. They can focus their interest and their feedback on areas that they might have special interest about, as well as expertise and knowledge in those as well. The seventh proposition that I have is multi-channel communications that focus on social networks are ineffective for meaningful collaboration and are potentially threatening to the process. And it's primarily through the lack of structure and control. And so in this case, more is not always better. My former employee, the city of Louisville, which is now Metro Louisville, I looked into their website a few days ago and noticed that they have over 30 Twitter accounts. They have a score of Facebook pages, YouTube channels, and Instagram accounts. And so while social media is a great way for broadcasting information, it's not a great way for collaborating between them, because these are channels that if they're not being managed on a regular basis, people feel like, well, they're leaving comments, they're asking questions in that, and my government isn't listening to me in that. So utilizing the social networks for what they are, which is social, right? They're not a town hall meeting. They're called social networks because they are a social gathering in that. But think about them as the electronic rallies, the electronic demonstrations that we have. The sentiment that's expressed in social media and social networks can have an impact on the decision-making process, but it shouldn't really be that tool used for public engagement from the standpoint of soliciting public input, feedback, and comment there as well. Again, there's technologies out there now that can be used to be able to capture the sentiment and comments going on and bring them into a centralized environment that can be used in the decision-making process. But again, it's gaining that control, or taking back that control, if you will, to be able to have a more structured environment. So again, technology used to capture and organize public comments, in decision making, the social media works for listening to residents, but not necessarily for engaging with them in discussions there as well. And then the last proposition that I wanted to bring up here is to secure and maintain public support by meeting resident expectations and preferences for communicating, sharing information, and closing the feedback loop. So in this last proposition here, this starts to look at our primary audience out there, the public. And we're what, 2-3 years after this pandemic. We saw what happened, the challenges we had to engage residents online. Many, as I mentioned, many jurisdictions are still using electronic formats, digital formats, online formats to engage the public. We've heard from local governments, what they've been doing, how they've been doing it. We've heard from a number of technology companies, public engagement platform companies, in terms of what they're seeing with their platforms and how they're used out there. But we don't have a lot of data from the public in terms of what they're looking at in terms of these type of engagement forums online. And this is all about meeting people where they are, providing them with the information to participate, letting them know that their input is used in the deliberation. And so we had a gentleman named Graham Stone from Public Input, who was on a session on Wednesday, on one of the sessions here as well. His company, Public Input, conducted a national survey to ask residents about their preferences for engaging their government online in these areas there as well. I've got a link to the survey results that I can share. But what I wanted to mention, just a couple things that came out of that were really revealing from there in terms of listening to residents on how they are. Again, about meeting people where they are, and then closing this feedback loop, which is so important to ensure their continued involvement in these processes. Most of the residents said that they preferred electronic methods for notification, preferably through email. 71% said that they'd never been asked by their local government for public input on issues. Now, coming out of local government, I know that we've done a number of ways to reach out to residents when we wanted them to participate in the process. We've issued news releases. We've put information on web pages. We've used legal notices in the newspaper. But obviously what this is saying is that that's not where they're going to get the information on what's going on. And so it's critical to be able to meet their preferences of how they want to be contacted and how they want to be engaged. And so, and then half of the people who said they don't engage said even if they're contacted, they don't feel like they have enough information from their government to be able to contribute informed feedback and input. And any of us, you know, if any of us are invited to a meeting and we're expected to participate in that meeting, you know, we want to be briefed on what we're going to be talking about and what the final decision, or what are the expectations of my participation in this process here. And one of the other things that we learned in this survey is that 80% of the participants said that they don't ever hear back from their local government in terms of how their input was used in the decision-making process. And that's that closing that feedback loop that is really important. And again, it's where technology and organization are crucial to maintaining good relations, then empowering the residents to be able to not only know how their information is being used, but that it is being used. And at the same time, when I'm asked again, I'll probably want to participate in that process there as well. So, you know, they'll return on there as well. So those are the 8 propositions that I wanted to present about how to decentralize this thing called public engagement in today's digital society. And thank you, Shane, and thank you, GFOA for giving me this opportunity.